Lions Rock Productions.
Hey, this is executive producer and host of the Break It Down show, Pete A. Turner, and this is our limited series called The Prison Chronicles. Somebody's murdered in the United States every 30 seconds. Convictions for first-degree murder commonly carry a prison sentence of 15 to life. And ultimately, most inmates are eventually released, which begs the question, what condition do we want inmates to be in as they complete their incarceration? If I told you that most inmates walk out with less than $1,000, would you feel positive about their chances of becoming a contributing member to society? What if I told you that number is a lot closer to $200 and less? Now what are your thoughts? Previously on the Prison Chronicles.
We had celebrated the concepts of living and dying on behalf of what I call the parasite, the gang psychology. We believed it was a worthy thing to live and die for and to give your freedom for. We believed that was a legitimate, viable future.
It's now 25 years since I did the things I did that got me in trouble, and I still feel as guilty, and I still beat myself up as much as I did when it first happened. So that's my reality. That's what I got to deal with.
It took me a decade of some pretty deep introspection to gain the insight into my actions and behaviors from my childhood that really drove me when I was in the Marine Corps. I really excelled because of certain things that went on in my childhood. Unbeknownst to me why I was excelling, I wasn't any more brave or heroic than anyone else, but I took a lot more chances and risks, not really knowing why.
Sounds familiar.
Which also led to prison. Yes. When I lost the emotional anchor that was the Marine Corps, I attached to something else and someone else. And that became a driving factor. And in trying to help that person, I went to prison for 23 years. What put them there? That's an interesting fact that I don't know if most people, and this is in California, veterans do almost a third more time than anyone else as far as civilians for the same exact crime, primarily or solely because they're veterans. That's empirical fact.
So going through the juvenile hall system and getting in fights and getting arrested, I ended up going to Boys Ranch at 17, got out at 18. I was out of control with my anger, and the dangerous part was I didn't give myself any other option.
These are the Prison Chronicles. All right, so now we know our former inmates, and we understand where they came from and how they got to prison. Let's change gears, and let's examine their experience from within the prison, the external environment, and then of course the infrastructure of their mind, the internal environment. I want you to pause real quick and think about a word or a full thought on what you expect the experience of the prison system to be like. Remember, keep in mind, we're trying to understand the condition of someone when they exit so that they can become a viable member of society. Now let's see how your belief lines up with their reality. Since we've already established that the combat lens is useful in understanding life before prison, here's another maxim I developed while deployed. If the goal of incarceration is to reduce recidivism and create a stable, contributing citizen, we must know and understand the condition of inmates during incarceration. This is what I call the ground truth. What is it like day to day for an inmate? What challenges do they face? Again, internally, externally. What is the infrastructure of the mind? Let's find out now. For a lot of us, we default to prison is for punishment. Does that even work anymore? Let's start with Honore, and he's going to describe what it's like to live in prison. And by the way, in general, we have supporting episodes that give even more detail on these different people as we talk about them. So there's a fantastic episode with Honoré Vachon talking about his time, because he was a gang member and also a successful rapper. So wherever he went, his crew, his family, his gang, they were in a better position because of his financial well-being. Go and check those out at breakitdownshow.com, and they'll also be in the show notes. You can listen to these extra episodes. There's one just for just about everybody involved in the Prison Chronicles. Now, here comes Honoré. Talk a little bit, it doesn't have to be about specifically about your experience, but what is that like for someone who's incarcerated?
It is utterly and significantly devastating psychologically. It's psychologically devastating because you have to make a decision to ultimately walk away from everything that you believed yourself to be. You have to reject your own existence. And if you've been a certain way for 25, 30 years, some 25-year-old kid who lived that life for 10 years straight or better, 15 years straight, it's going to be very difficult to activate that understanding. So first, there's the hopelessness that must be overcome. You have to overcome the hopelessness. How do you accomplish that? There has to be some other thing to grasp onto to say this is more important than that. And whatever their this and that are, they have to be willing to they have to first decipher it. They have to realize it. And so what I saw a lot of times where it might be the children, it'll be the mother, a death, it'll be usually a betrayal. Like you got guys, I know guys, end up where they got given an instruction and they carry out that instruction, but it was a bad move. And then the ramifications of that result in discipline that they feel betrayed by. Like you did what you were supposed to do, and someone disagrees with it who has more power, and now you're ultimately in trouble. And it'll burn, that'll burn. And sometimes that can start it, where it's like, hey man, fuck this shit. This life, this is bullshit. And that'll start, but the courage to actually make a change or do something about it is just not there. And then there's so many starts and stops. If you start with education, you're subject to the lockdowns that will happen. Until recently, in the state of California, you could go on lockdown for a year, 2 years at a time because they don't want to release the population. So they're segregating the yards, segregating the North and South, the whites, the blacks, segregating the Crips and Bloods. You'll have an incident that happens, and now one group of 3 different races are on lockdown. One race isn't. They start doing limited releases. So they're going to release 10 of these guys, 5 of those guys, see what happens. Incident happens, everybody's back on lockdown. If you're trying to educate yourself and you're not a part of a correspondence course, who can afford that, right?
Right.
If you don't have that going, you're probably not going to educate yourself by way of the system's available programs because you don't have access to them. And so now if you don't, why start then? If I'm never going to complete this year, it's not going to happen. I'll go to some vocational program, learn how to do car detailing or whatever, but we're on lockdown all the time. I can't finish it. It just becomes a place to go to be physically so you can maintain your privileges. I'm going to go, hang out with the homies, have some coffee, doodle in this book, copy other people's paperwork, turn it in, and we'll go on lockdown, and now I got a vacation. Not even about ever finishing and obtaining the education. It's just about maintaining the privilege. So whether we have to attend or not for reasons of our own creation, we still maintain the privileges. So you just want A1A status, not be on A2B status or D1D time, and that's it. Once you got A1A, it's like, who cares if I go to work or not, or education or anything like that, because ultimately you can't finish. I think I first started seeing this stuff being applied in 2012 when Jerry Brown started really signing paperwork. Lonnie Hancock, the senators, a lot of them started taking measures to ensure that people had opportunities to rehabilitate if they wanted to. So that's hope.
Yeah.
Hope happened. Another one they did was, if you have life without the possibility of parole, you're no longer trapped level 4. You can become level 3. So those guys got hope. Like, okay, I may not be going home, but I can go to a level 3 program and not be in this war zone or trapped in these circumstances. They won't admit that, but they don't. Most people didn't want that anymore at certain ages. They just didn't want to do it anymore, but couldn't say so and had nowhere to go. There was no recourse. So you just keep it to yourself. So once they did that, those guys had hope. And then later on, like 2016, they came with another rule change that allowed a life without the possibility of parole to go to level 2 for increased access to a rehabilitative program and if they stayed out of trouble. So now you have hope. Okay, if I do this, I can go. Then the family visits came back. Like you have a life sentence, you can have family visits if you've been out of trouble for a certain amount of time and don't have specific drug-related offenses or domestic abuse offenses. Things like that, sex offenses. If you don't have these things, you can have your family visits again. Now guys are like, wow, I can have a real relationship with a woman. Well, we even calling that a real relationship. You can have a semblance of a relationship. Mm-hmm. You can have intimacy, go to this little apartment duplex in the facility, cook a meal, watch some TV, make love, take a shower, or even go with their mom. Some guys go with their mother and their nieces and nephews or their kids. Hope happens. So those type of things activated, guys' willingness to try to navigate a little bit better to stay out of trouble if you didn't have to get into something to not do it. But then, the desire got to exist. And then you have to have family. You have to have hope that you can meet a woman. All that stuff has to come into play. They can see certain guys walking around pulling that off. So the haters, will just be jealous and want to disrupt that. But you have other guys who are inspired by it. Like, damn, man, I can do it. I can do it. And so I saw that happen. And then when they started saying, the youth offender bill happened, that's when I saw the most change. When Senate Bill 260 came into play, Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 261, you saw guys start really like, I'm going to group, I'm going to go to AA, NA, I'm going to go to Criminal Gangs Anonymous. People started really trying to make a change because they believed they could go home. And I wouldn't even say really trying to make a change. They started going to the places where someone would go if they were making a change. So I'm going to get my body here, even if they don't believe in it. I'm going to be there because I need my file to reflect that I was there. And usually once they were there, those guys would be exposed to other stimuli now just because you're here and meet the right people, because there were these subcultures in there. I didn't discover until I started changing my life like this, that the guys who go to groups have their own little culture. They meet up together, they take care of each other. And the guys who go to church do that. The guys who are in education, they have these little flocks where they're moving in a way where you might not even notice them if they're doing it right. If they don't have any exciting thing attached to their name, they'll blend in and just become white noise. And unless you start rocking with them, then you find out that, oh, wow, that other stuff is white noise. All of this stuff requires hope, man.
From your own direct experience where punitive action led to rehabilitation, I mean, because we have this kind of balance between, punishment and rehabilitation, and it doesn't seem that we walk this line very well, but does the punishment part lead to someone coming out with a less likelihood for recidivism?
It does not. I think that anyone who's capable of the punishment itself being enough to instigate change for them, they were already in a decent household. They were already in a circumstance where they were choosing to expose themselves to something that they didn't have to expose themselves to. So now that the punishment has come into play, they can decide they don't want to be attached to A, B, C, and D anymore, and they're already removed from it because they just don't have to go to it anymore. They can just stay at home. They have family, an ability to get a job. They don't have to go engage that and maybe never had to do it. But if you say the guy who really is from where he's from, that is breeding ground for him. And then he's punished for behavior in that environment, in that little culture that he's isolated to, whether he isolated himself or he's been isolated by cultural factors. that person is going to perceive that punishment as an unjust thing. And so now he suffered an injustice, and this is going to create anger. It's going to create anger. It's going to create dissatisfaction. You have people who start saying, fuck America, society's against them. All of that stuff just turns into anger, and it makes it worse. That person is going to behave. That casual indifference is going to be strengthened. It's going to be reinforced. If it's purely punishment.
Right, if it's purely punishment. The other thing that seems to come out of that environment also, from what I know about culture, is that if punishment is a thing and you don't have enough, then it makes you tough to withstand it. And it becomes a badge where, like, yeah, this bad thing's going to happen. But like you guys, it don't mean shit to me. I can go do these years, these programs, none of that matters to me. It's not going to change me because I'm tough like you guys. I know that applies to, places where people get shot every day in a war zone, but it's got to also apply in a place where people get shot every day, like down there by Florin Road.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Crazy.
It's a callous. They say callousness. That's a part of what they read off when you get sentenced, or if you have to go to the parole board, the callousness of the crime.
Mm-hmm.
They always talk about that. How do you develop a callous? A callous you aren't born with those. You're born with a callous heart. Hands don't get calluses when the hands aren't utilized. Whatever it is that this callousness is on, the brain, the spirit, the heart, that callous has to have been worked. It has to have been developed.
Yeah.
And for that skin and heart to create callousness. And so you end up in a circumstance where it just makes it worse. Because to withstand the sentence, to withstand the imposition of the punishment, you have to have a certain degree of callousness. They tell you don't have a facial expression when you're about to be sentenced, or when the jury's coming in for a verdict. Don't engage in eye contact. They teach you all of these disconnected things that you're supposed to do so that you don't make the circumstance worse. But what you end up with is the only way for me to do that is I have to be callous then. I have to not have a facial expression. How do I accomplish that if I'm being impacted by what I'm listening to? You're going to sit through a trial and pretend to be unaffected. At some point, you taught yourself to tolerate that kind of hyper pain and to develop a lack of empathy. So if I can't exhibit it, then what do I do when I'm feeling it internally? I got to try to turn it off so that it's not on my face then. And so there's your callous. Mm-hmm. And so you see guys getting sentenced to almost appear to be unaffected, but it's because they've been instructed to be that way, either by their attorney, the environment, or by the culture itself. That, hey, man, F them. We don't show them nothing. We're not going to give them nothing. So now it's the tough guy thing. Even though you may be spiritually devastated by what you listen. For me, it was at sentencing. I was devastated by what happened to Mrs. Harris. But to exhibit it would have resulted in an accusation of softness and weakness.
Yeah,
it's a lot to it. But yeah, there's a certain callous that's developed because of the nature of that rough, the texture of the lifestyle, and that has to be defeated as well.
I have tried several different times, several different ways, several different contacts to get someone from Department of Corrections to talk to me. And I'll say this may or may not make the show, but those motherfuckers are cowards. They're people that have good careers, and we're trying to have a candid conversation. I can get you guys to talk, folks that have been, that are convicts, and I've had people who are on the nonprofit helping, get folks rehabilitated to talk. But what's wrong with the system? Why can't we get someone to sit down and why is it so hard? I probably can find some of it. Why is it so hard to get someone to sit down candidly and talk about the correction system and where things need to go?
I can tell you, man. I was at Richard J. Donovan. I was on that ECHO facility. I was a founding member, and I still am, of the Offender Administered Rehabilitative Services Committee. Probably the only the ward special inmate committee in the state. And we got all the way up the relationships with Ralph Diaz. Scott Kernan came to my office before he left. They gave us an office space, like real office space with furniture, computers. And I discovered inside of the fight, just to get these guys day room time of programs that the level 2 should have had, that they were promised before they were willing to go to a non-designated program and facility. And that union, the CCPOA, was so against change that they stopped at nothing to be disruptive. I'm serious. They stopped at nothing to be disruptive. And this is the reason. When the people responsible for your rehabilitation have the most to lose if you are rehabilitated, that's an inherent flaw. It's an inherent flaw in the design of the system. If you were to institute the programs that are on the table in headquarters, if you instituted that on a real level, they're going to reduce the workforce for CDCR. It's inevitable. If you have peace in prisons, then you can immediately justify why you don't have to pay a correctional officer $80,000-$90,000 a year to stand and lean against the wall, or turn a key to let guys in and out of a classroom that just has no violence at all. You're paying a doorman $100,000 a year with overtime, $120,000 a year to stand there and turn a key. Once they start putting all those cameras in, the guys are peacefully functioning. They believe they're going to go home. They're getting their family visit, and they have hope. Then those things have immediately become the enemy of the union. And so the reason why they're scared to talk to you is because if they do, they're going to catch hell from their union and their peers. And I've seen good officers. They don't all have the same union. The mental health department has its own hiring authority. The correctional officers have their own union, and then their administrative staff have their own union. It's super political. So if you say at the level where you would want to talk to administrative staff, man, those people are terrified of saying the wrong thing because it's career suicide. It's career suicide. So they may want to tell you all kind of stuff. They may be progressive Democrats. They're liberals, but they know that to answer those questions or to express a desire for rehabilitation to be a part of the system, then they're going to go back to their own peer community and be a pariah.
Right.
Promotional opportunities are crippled. It's terrible, man. It's a discouragement for people who took their job to really be forces for change. And I've met my share. Those people have to do that almost in secrecy.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not surprised. And, you can't blame someone for protecting what they got because they got something. And I don't know that I would do anything different. So here's a question I have for everybody. What is the standard of success for a prison? What's the goal? Shaka says it's redemption, it's rehabilitation, and everybody's capable of these things. If we set that as our standard, we have a totally different launching point than we're just going to punish people. How do we get to redemption? How do we get to rehabilitation? If you recall, Shaka has said prison was an extension of his community. But since that's true, how do you redeem someone who says, most of the people in my family have been shot? This level of violence is on par with what I've experienced in combat zones. Actually, it's actually worse than that. It's more akin to what the locals experience. Sure, I've lost friends and continue to do so through suicide and the trauma that we all suffer, but it's more pervasive when you live in that environment, when you can't escape. The people from Shinkay district in Zabul, Afghanistan, they don't get to go home. They just get to continue to see their friends and family, people around them, murdered, harmed, suffering. That's Honor Ray's world. That's Shaka's world. The danger and the pain, it's omnipresent. Which is why when I bring up to Shaka getting off of the X and how that's a military concept of this is danger right here, why it resonates with him. In his neighborhood, there are numerous places to fear. Or there's memories of people getting shot in this place or that place. Think about Honor Ray as a little kid, 13 years old, had to have a battle plan to go to the Florin Mall as a 13-year-old This is America. This isn't Afghanistan. I want to move into life when you're incarcerated and what that's like, just to illustrate what's there. Like you said, I hate to deal in the cliches. I want to deal in the things that are interesting. But once again, there are X's everywhere. There are pitfalls, but there's also opportunity depending on the system, depending on the prison that you're in. But help us understand what that looks like for someone who's in, because we don't have a clear sense of, are we punitive, focused on rehabilitation? Does punitive discourage anybody? What do we get out of this, especially, when we lead the world in incarceration, when we primarily incarcerate men of color and recidivism is high, we're not doing it right. So help me understand what that looks like, what that terrain is.
I mean, it was funny when I came home and I started moving around the country, and people would say, "Well, where did you grow up at?" And I'm like, "Well, I grew up in Detroit." And then I would pause and be like, "Well, I actually grew up in prison, and prison is an extension of the neighborhood. It's an extension of the community, and you walk into this very volatile environment where all the resources were stripped out of it. When I first went to prison, I could go to college, and I was actually going to college, and I was averaging a 4.0 when, then President Clinton passed this crime bill that stripped Pell Grants from the prisons and discontinued our ability to go to college unless you had the ability to pay for it on your own. But along with that, a lot of the rehabilitative programs went out the window. The therapy programs were very anemic. They were more therapy designed to make you say all the right things to get paroled or get out of prison and let the department off the hook. So it wasn't like the type of therapy that was really about getting you to the best version of yourself and allowing you to deal with, the realities of and circumstances of the environment you come from. So, it's hard. Those of us who make it out, who are successful, typically, we come in literate, which is an advantage because it allows us to read books, allows us to challenge ideas, thoughts, and beliefs. And we're mentored by men who are most likely going to die in prison, or women who's going to die in prison, who've been in for decades, but they have all this wisdom that we won't even think about as an asset to society because we're so hell-bent on hurting and further causing damage to people by punishing them instead of really saying, these are our fellow citizens, and whatever landed them in that environment, we have a responsibility to ensure that they come out healthy and whole, and we're just not doing that. We haven't had the courage to do it. Politicians who are the guardians of policies that dictate whether people go in or get out have been cowardly, for the most part. There's been a few courageous ones who stepped up and said, we need to fix this thing. But for the most part, they like to play it safe and let's wrap it in some language that we think that people can digest. And the reality is, people are way smarter than, politicians give them credit. And if we are honest about the success level of those who have support and resources, I think it's a no-brainer in terms of how we can change the system. And I mean, that's the work that I do. My organization, we are leading in the field when it comes to, we actually give a damn. We actually really put in the work that's rooted in people's humanity. We have therapists in office, we have life coaches, we have career readiness programs, we have vocational training, transitional housing. And so because we know what the needs are rooted in our experience.
Tell us what your organization is called.
Anti-Recidivism Coalition, or ARC.
You said that everybody is rehabilitatable, and that's a challenge because you think, Charles Manson's not rehabilitatable. But you had such a great answer. I want to be able to include this in here because it really does inform.
Has Charles Manson killed anybody in the last 4 decades he was in prison?
No, he didn't. Yeah, he definitely didn't do that.
So the thing is, most people would probably respond to be, well, he probably didn't do it because he's in prison. But the reality is people get killed in prison every day.
Yeah.
People are redeemable. You got to get to the source of separating like mental illness, which I think would be the case for somebody like Charles Manson, and addressing mental illness as a real disease and not being in denial about that part. And then you can deal with the difference between criminal behavior, mental illness, or reactive behavior, because I don't even think it's criminal. There's trauma-informed reactive behavior to things that's happening in the community. So once you can separate the mental illness part, like, for example, right, you can say, like, I went to prison for killing somebody, which means that I, in a moment, in a heated moment of an argument, I fired the bullets that claimed a man's life. Does that make me a killer, like a person who's like, there's some type of thrill? Like, I didn't get any thrill for that. That was a very reactive, very traumatized experience for myself and the family members and et cetera. But that came out of trauma. That didn't come out of, a fetish to kill people. Like, it didn't come out of a desire to like go out, I'm going out hunting people, right? So once you can separate that, the mental illness part, like if a person has an affinity for harming other people, like, that's a mental disease that you have to deal with in that space. If a person is carrying a gun and it's illegal to carry a gun and then they shoot somebody because they did a dumb robbery and they panic, like, those are very different things, and that's easy to fix. And a lot of times that's the drug addiction, that's the early, childhood trauma, all these different things that go into the decision maker. But I can tell you, and I've been around some of the toughest guys, with every type of crime you could think of that's been committed. And I've never met a person where I just looked at that didn't have mental illness, that didn't have severe mental illness, and said that this guy can't turn it around if he's given the tools to turn it around. So that's what I mean when I say I believe everybody is worthy of redemption. People don't even see us as humans. They don't see us as fellow citizens. When I was in Germany, I was in one of the cells and just kind of reflecting on my time of being in solitary. A woman warden came up to me and she was like, hey, are you okay? And I was like, I was just reflecting on the 4.5 years I spent in solitary. And she said, we would never do that to one of our citizens. And that's what really struck me, is like, what we do to people here in this country, it is impossible to think that we could say, this is our fellow citizen.
Yeah.
So we've othered people to the point where we don't even see them as fellow citizens, let alone our fellow human beings. And that's part of the problem.
Okay, now we're going to have Kenyatta talk about his life in prison. On his path, his crimes were relatively minor, things that were worthy of incarceration, but he liked to party, he liked fast money, he liked things, he had a big ego. Sounds like a young guy to me. But ultimately, his actions got him 3 felony strikes and a life sentence. And then things got worse.
Well, prison has a really, really sobering effect on an individual. You have a lot of time to think. And during that time, there's all kinds of crazy stuff happening around you. Probably around that same time that I was telling you about 3 years into my sentence, I ended up stabbing an individual in prison and getting sent to Pelican Bay State Prison. And, Pelican Bay at that time, I don't know what it's like now because I'm not there, but at that time was a really, really violent and crazy place to be. It was the worst of the worst. Everybody there on the yard that I was on had 100 years to life, 3 life sentences. I mean, nobody was going home and nobody really gave a damn about nothing except prison politics on the yard. And it was there that I saw more stabbings, more shootings, more beatings, more slashings, more killings there than that I was there in that short period of time within 3 years. And I saw it all of the other years combined and all the other prisons combined. And so it was that really hostile environment that I was in, really violent environment that I was in, that really made me start thinking about, wow, do I really want to be here for the rest of my life? Am I really, that guy where I want to walk around, and be in this environment for the rest of my life?
Was there anything about the institution, like, other than the fact that you're in prison and there's a lot of trouble you can get into in prison, but, were there any resources available to you that were helping you do this? Or was this like primarily a personal thing? You had to find the network. I mean, I know you mentioned education, and I know a lot of prison systems do their best you know, as much as they can pay for, they try to do their best to help inmates get educated.
Well, I had to dig and dig and dig at first, you know, and I'm still digging to this day. But when I got transferred to San Quentin, that's when I actually, well, let me back up. The majority of the other prisons that I went to didn't have any kind of self-help programs. They were limited to like an AA and a church group. That's it. Yeah. It wasn't until I got to San Quentin that I was introduced to a whole host of, you know, self-help rehabilitative programs there, you know, that are really designed to help people change their lives. They had great educational programs there too. They had the Prison University Project, the Insight Prison Project, just a number of other programs there to dive into. And once I got to San Quentin, that's what I did. You know, I immersed myself in all those programs there. It really helped me change my life. San Quentin is like an outlier though. There's 33 prisons in California. San Quentin has more prison programs in that one prison than all those other prisons combined.
Huh.
Yeah. And so, you know, I found myself, it's crazy to say it, but San Quentin is, if you're ever going to go to prison, that's the best prison to go to. Seriously, they have a wealth of programs there, and it's like a model for the other, it's like a flagship model for the other prisons in California.
Ron self-describes how he found humanity and courage, of all places, in prison. His remarkable realization and redemption was only possible from inside, where he was forced to deal with his own issues, his own problems. You need to hear Ron's story of survivor guilt. Again, we have these episodes that support what the Prison Chronicles is, and there's absolutely a fantastic one of Ron. You do not want to miss that. That's also in the show notes. When you hear the story of his failed suicide, it's going to shock you. Here comes Ron.
Brian Wainwright, he's the program director at VTC. And we were talking about 23 years I was in prison. My entire life, I had been training to be something, right?
Yes.
That something did not involve empathy or compassion. But after 10 years in prison, right? Prison of all places, I found my compassion and I found empathy, not only for myself, but others. I also found in prison that there's strength in vulnerability. And when I modeled that strength, when I allowed myself to cry in the presence of other veterans and allowed them to cry. Now, let me share this with you. I share a story because I model the work with the men where the last operation I was in, the men that I was with, they all died in about 9 seconds. It was just a shit show. They were in a kill zone. I wasn't. It is what it was. And then I come to prison and we're doing the circle process. And one of the men, and he said I could share this. So even though I'm not saying his name, I'm not violating confidentiality. He shared a story when he was a teenager. He was brutally raped by people in his family. Now, to carry that around, and then there's subconscious driving you whatever way it's driving you throughout your life with that, and then the military. But to come to prison, a place where masculinity is at the forefront of everything, right? Everybody has that chest beating facade going, right? I'm a man. But to share that story in a prison setting, I used to think I knew what courage was. And I realized I knew nobody could tell me anything of courage after spending almost 8 years in combat. But after experiencing this man share that story in a prison setting, I realized that I knew nothing of courage, and that within the prison system, I found more veterans healing and healing others than I have anywhere else since. And I'm working with a lot of active duty military people and veterans just in the community that haven't gone to prison. In prison, you're kind of corralled. And when they lock that door behind you every night at 9 o'clock and you're in that 6x12 space, you had a lot of time to think about what's really important and what's not.
What helped you the most, you think, while you were in, so that once you were given the chance to transition out, what helped you the most? And you just, you were just answering it. So thank you.
Yeah, it's the veterans. And I got to say, I attempted to kill myself in prison, and I realized post-surgery, I had a cervical fusion, the whole damn thing. 80% of my issue was the pain, just on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 15 for 5 years.
Yeah.
Just couldn't take it anymore. Then having clarity about what I had done, how I felt I had brought shame to the men that had died, how I had brought shame to the Marine Corps. I handled everything inappropriately. And I spent my whole life training to help those that cannot help themselves. And in an effort to help someone, I did it in the most inappropriate way. And for all of us, both of you included. At one point in time, we were trusted to carry a weapon in defense of this country, and I violated that trust. And I want to try to get that trust back. I realize I never will, but I can spend the rest of my life trying. For a lot of veterans inside, it's the same thing. They're still serving, even though they're not in. They want to give back. They want to make up. And they want to be understood. You know, I got to tell you, guys, I spent, and this could be just the Marine in me, just how I was raised, I don't know. I spent an exorbitant amount of energy not allowing myself to be institutionalized. And that came at a cost, because in prison, you assimilate. You run with your race, meaning if you're white, you kick it with the whites.
Yeah.
You do work. You put in work. I mean, violent stuff with the whites. If you're black, every race. I made it a point that I refused to do that. And it came at a cost. I mean, I lived in a building. I lived in a building with 920 people and never felt more alone than I did then, because I chose not to take a side. And when you don't take a side, that causes, you know, you're walking around locked and cocked all the time.
Yeah.
Now, you said something that's very interesting. So, you know, you're allowed these little TVs. So I used to watch TV, and I'd watch the news, try and stay current events. And everything I see on the news, someone's getting robbed, someone's getting carjacked, someone's getting this, that, and the other thing. And when I get out, I have found that I am, my heightened sense of awareness, some would call it paranoia, it's off the fucking charts. It's ridiculous. It's not healthy, and I know it. I mean, I walk someplace where there's a shadow. I carry a flashlight with me. I have a little combat flashlight with me. Now I'm lighting up the dark corners anytime I see them. Got the shit scared out of me by a raccoon and their family the other night. But it was just like,
the combat guy in me has to ask: are you red light enabled at all times?
yeah.
Hey, it's not paranoia, man. It's stay alert, stay alive. That's what I was taught.
It's interesting. Prison will actually exaggerate the word, you know what I'm talking about. It makes it worse like 100-fold. Prison made my PTSD freaking in neon lights.
Yeah.
And then getting out of prison, I don't look back. I'm going back to the prison. The hardest thing for me, the most moving thing for me, is I've gone back to a few of the prisons that I was actually housed at, and to be able to walk in and to walk out and know that I'm leaving veterans behind, knowing exactly what they're feeling, because I've been there and seen other people that have gotten out and come back in and leave. I know exactly how they feel, and it's sometimes it's hard to even leave the parking lot after I walk out of the prison, because you're leaving people behind. Yeah, this is hard. I shared something that happened in my Vogue group, that happened in my unit, and it was so, I think, graphic, horrific, and just beyond imagination. There were literally crickets when I finished sharing my story. And this is supposed to be a process group, right? It's one of the reasons I created VHE, is because most civilians, even in prison, don't know how to address or respond to combat trauma or events that happen. And to answer your question, veterans don't, the events of the past get in the way of the future because they don't want to think about them. But you have to think about them, and you have to address them to get past them. And if you don't, it stops you from getting past other things in your life, like the reality that you did something that brought you to prison.
What about the prison population in general? I mean, you've been at San Quentin, you've been at Corcoran, you've been at hard places. What are we not getting about as society, as, you know, the mass, not political, but just what are we?
This is important. This is good.
Yeah.
No, I'll tell you right now, prison is beyond a third world country. The things that go on in a prison system, you wouldn't think that you're in America of all places, because there's some medieval shit that goes on in the prison system, and it's not entirely the prison system's fault. They have a hugely impossible hard job to do, because when other human beings have to cage other human beings, right? When human beings have to do that to each other, it takes a toll. It takes a toll on the guards. It takes a toll on the inmates, the families. Everyone's affected. The PTSD rate among prison guards is 3 times higher than combat veterans. Did you know that?
No.
I can see it though. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, right. It's passive aggressive. So think about it. You have these guards that are just passive aggressive because of how hard it is to do what they do, that doesn't make for happy inmates, because that interaction becomes jaded, and it creates a relationship to authority that causes recidivism, because you become trained and ingrained to disrespect authority, to not trust authority. Not everybody's bad in the Department of Corrections throughout the United States, but it only takes a few that really cause a lot of psychological damage. And people in prison, I used to think, before I went to prison, I'd hear the news, oh, so-and-so is getting sentenced or whatever. And I think, well, yeah, you're going to prison, you deserve it. Over 2/3 of the people I met in prison were people that were there. It was a few seconds of their lives that went horribly wrong, and they made a bad decision that cost somebody their lives. And rightfully, they came to prison. But to be treated like animals and to be treated less than animals, that's what goes on in prison. It's a demoralizing, dehumanizing experience, and it doesn't do anything to help a human being be a better human being that made a horrible mistake. Now, don't get me wrong. I met quite a few people that absolutely needed to be in prison. These were thugs. They're criminals. That's what they do. They take down scores. They break the law. That's their life. But that was the smaller population. The greater population are people that just a series of events unfolded into a bad moment in their life. And that bad moment doesn't define who they are. It's not what they are. They may have killed someone, but to say they're a murderer because they did kill someone, to me, a murderer is someone that gets up every morning and goes out and kills someone. Daily, you're killing someone. Maybe I have it wrong. I don't know. But I met very few actual killers in prison.
Did you meet anybody that was beyond saving, rescuing, helping?
So you have to take a couple things into account for me to answer that question. One, there are actual people within the prison system that are actually psychologically damaged. They're neurologically. There's something wrong there. And back when I think it was Reagan that closed a lot of the mental institutions in California, people that needed psychological mental health were being sent to prison. So there are those people they call enhanced outpatient individuals. They're supposed to be in medical facilities. They really don't know what they're doing. And it's not that they can't be helped. They don't know. You follow me? They're actually mentally, they have issues.
Yeah.
Now, take them out of the picture now. You're dealing with inmates. I truly believe everyone is redeemable. And all human beings are good. We're products of our environment, just like a pit bull that gets trained to be a fighting dog.
I want to break in for a second, and I want to give you some context about Ron's experience. He's seen the absolute worst out of humanity. Boy soldiers in Africa trained to rape and kill. So when he says everybody is redeemable and worthy of redemption, he's met people that have become something vile, and yet he still considers them redeemable. And in some ways, he's recognized that he's largely no different than those boys who've been inculcated into something awful. As we continue to learn about redemption, Richard Bronson chimes in from his experience while serving time. He makes a powerful point. When someone goes to prison and is denied any real chance to develop, what are they going to do when they get out? They're not going to eat. They're not going to be able to live. The data around recidivism is crystal clear. Inmates released to stable jobs, they just don't go back to prison.
On the inside, what are some things that both contribute and detract from the individual's ability to rehabilitate?
That's the big question. And interestingly, I did some of my time in a prison in Alabama. It was a federal prison. And not only was it a federal prison, it was a prison camp, which is the lowest level of security.
Yeah.
So my experience could have been a lot worse. I think in order to have an intelligent conversation, for people who don't have familiarity, and thank God that they don't have it, it's nothing that I'm happy that I do have. But nonetheless, there's an assumption that if you're in prison, you're in all different prisons, they're all the same, and jails are the same as prisons, and one state is the same as the other, and states and federal, there's no difference. And of course, that's entirely not true. Federal system in general is much more professionally run, safer, cleaner, and more opportunity available to actually come out of prison with some kind of plan and with some kind of, enhanced education. So I can't speak specifically about the danger that I saw while I was in prison doing my couple of years, but unfortunately, I also did time in Rikers Island in New York, which is arguably the very worst place on the planet of our Earth. It is Dante's Inferno to the max, and it was just absolutely awful. And there was danger that was pregnant in the air. There was lurking badness all about, and it was a scary, scary place to be. And one had to be entirely on one's toes. And even then, that might only afford you the opportunity to see, while something bad was coming your way. Maybe it'd be better off not to be on your toes. I don't know, because there's probably not much chance to help you. But in any event, what goes on in prison is one issue, certainly, in that people are treated like animals and therefore act like animals, or have no great motivation to do other than that. And that seems to be the way to survive there. And prior to going to prison, everybody talks about what you got to do and what you got to learn. And part of what you got to learn is if someone gives you a hard time, doesn't matter if you can get the shit beaten out of you, you got to go first, because you got to gain respect, or else you're going to have trouble throughout your stay there. What doesn't go on is really what prevents, any kind of progress in a person's life and the overall prison system. The outgrowth of that is recidivism. I would argue, and the work that I'm involved with at 70 Million Jobs is to help my brothers and sisters coming out of prison get a job. Because statistically, it's very clear that if they don't get a job, they're going to recidivate, be rearrested very quickly. Contrary-wise, if they do get a job, chances are it'll have a happy ending. So it would seem pretty obvious, I would think, to almost anyone that help people develop trades and knowledge and expertise so that when they get out, they can get a job. And the sad truth is that there's precious little of that, if any. And as a result, you have people who've been in and out of jail and prison and like a turnstile, who are getting no training, no ability, no nothing. They have no education to begin with. And they come out and they're no better, and they're arguably a lot worse. And what do we expect is going to happen? A person has to eat. They got to take care of their family. They have to live. And if they have no skills, and at the same time, if the one skill they have, which is maybe flipping burgers or working the fry-o-lator at a fast food place, if they're not even given that opportunity, and let's face it, minimum wage in Florida and minimum wage in Texas, for example, $7.25 an hour. And they don't even give you a full-time job when you go work at one of these hamburger places. So you're making $100 a week, but stay out of trouble, young man. And it's almost laughable if it weren't so sad. So in any event, what's going on in prison is nothing to prevent the inevitable when people are released.
As you're experiencing this as a white-collar guy with a degree, and you're meeting people that you never otherwise would have met, what stood out in terms of the humanity that you were experiencing? I mean, you've talked about the violence of Rikers Island. Kenyatta talked about the violence of Pelican Bay. What really stood out and shocked you in any term?
I'm going to tell you, what really shocked me is after I got out and I was working in the nonprofit space for an organization called Defy Ventures that both of those guys, know well and have connections to. It was there for the first time that I was meeting murderers, and I was meeting really, truly violent criminals and pedophiles on top of that. And what I discovered amazingly was, and this is completely counterintuitive, is that the murderers, particularly, were among the most wonderful people I had ever met, the most soulful, deep, wise people I had ever come across, because they had spent so many years just contemplate. I mean, I assume it's kind of like a meditation in a cave for 25 years where, they just had a look inside of them for such a long time, and they came out of it with such wisdom and understanding. And also, it evokes so much sadness when, I've, in my work, in the for-profit and the non-profit space, I've had the occasion to bring hundreds of people into prisons. And, people who have never, ever been in a prison, have never, ever met people who have been in prison, and never would have expected to be hugging or talking to somebody who committed a terrible, violent crime. And to see how they ultimately all connect on a very human level. The truth is, we talk about second chances when they get out, but for most of these men, and there's far fewer women who are incarcerated, but for most of these folks, they never had a first chance. So the idea of a second chance is such a misnomer, and it suggests that they blew that first chance in some way. It's amazing when you cut through all the crap and you just are dealing with each other, which you do in prison over time. You eventually get to know people inevitably, and it's amazing how wonderful some of them are and how much jerks others are. They're human beings. There's no difference. There's absolutely no difference.
You've met these folks. How do we help get them out of that despair and survival mode and into a thriving mode?
I don't think it's by accident that about the only thing that people in prison take very seriously is this concept of self-respect. When you're in prison and, you're subject to the whims of, some guard who resents you for existing, there are rules that seem arbitrary, and you just got to follow them, and you can't debate them. But the only thing you can hold on to is your self-respect. And in prison, there are all kinds of really weird, strange, unexplained, particularly when you get there at first, rules relating to self-respect that don't apply on the outside. I remember I was sitting in the cafeteria eating, and I wanted the salt shaker. So I kind of reached across the table a little bit, that if that were with my family or my friends, nobody would say a word. It was not an issue at all. It could have been like I punched someone in the face for the reaction I got, because when you reach across someone's plate, even if you're marginally anywhere near it, that's disrespectful. Or when you're going in to take a shower, you can't get undressed and put a towel around you to walk into the shower like I have done in every upscale gym in the world that I've ever been to. In prison, however, you've got to walk into the shower fully dressed with a new change of clothes so that after you dry yourself off in the shower stall, you get dressed in the shower stall and go out. And when I heard about that, I said, this is so illogical and crazy. Why is this where you're drawing the line? And they go, it's all about respect. And, that's the one thing that'll get you into trouble if you're really ignorant of treating people with respect. That's the major cause of problems. So, there's a lot of it. The whole thing's weird. You put people in a weird, unnatural situation, and then you're surprised when they act weirdly. It's inevitable.
And you're putting people from very different backgrounds.
Exactly.
Into that situation. And you've got to learn all that as you go. I mean, that's a cultural lesson there for you.
Yeah, it very, very much is, and I found it very, very interesting. Again, when I was in prison, as opposed to Rikers, when I was in prison, I had because it was a relatively safe environment, I could just kind of look upon it, as a sociologist, and I just found it fascinating. When I went into Rikers, and I'm around all these gang guys and who have their own arcane rules and symbols and hand movements and all kinds of shit like that. And I'm going, I can't even like move my hands. I'm going to do the wrong thing. I'll get into trouble. There were scary repercussions for those differences in culture. Yeah, it's a whole weird thing. There's just no other way to put it. But the bottom line is, I believe that there is change afoot. Things have gotten better in the 15 years or 14 years since I've been out. Things have definitely gotten better. About the only thing that the Democrats and Republicans agree on is how phenomenally screwed up the whole system is.
Next, we get Matt Ray. When we last heard from Matt, he was off the rails, headed towards some kind of cataclysmic problem. Damage from sexual abuse, no regard for his own safety or for his future. He ultimately shot 2 people, murdering one of them. While he was locked up, his guilt, shame, and remorse showed up as he tried to struggle to see himself as redeemable.
I mean, I've seen a lot of people go through prison, and I watched them come and go 4 or 5 times in the 24 years that I spent there. It's kind of like, at that point in my life, had it just been the slap on the wrist, I don't think so. It would have took a lot more than that. It's like when you get a big chunk of time, I would say maybe 10 or more years, it's enough to really make you realize what's going on. I think you have enough time to really start looking at yourself and taking those classes and being brutally honest with yourself, which is really hard, and to really thinking about, like, who am I? What am I doing? What did I do? And part of the process, I think, for me from the beginning was seeing the family. It was just going through trial, the sentencing phase. Then once my board started coming up and they were appearing at my board to rally against me, because they were not wanting me to be released. So that, hearing their impact statements and hearing them at my board hearings was just excruciating. Like, that was the worst part. I mean, I was there, I was doing the time, I accepted it. If I never got out, I never got out. I had to own that. But hearing the families and what it did to them, seeing the pain on them that was horrible. That was the hardest part.
Yeah, I bet. When you're in for 24 to 25 years, it's a long time. How long did it take for you to get it, for the light to switch on and go,
I've got to do something different, whether I get out or not?
The first part is getting adjusted to prison and what goes on and the politics and survival mode, so kind of getting used to that side of it probably took a couple years to get into a solid, routine of, okay, definitely every day I've been thinking about this. And while I'll never know the true pain that I've got as this family, I can only imagine, and I see it. I really need to make a difference in a positive way. So how can I prepare myself? How can I better myself? Number one, I gotta go to these groups. It's mandatory for me, but at the same time, I'm going because I need to find out what's wrong with me. I don't obviously want to live this lifestyle. I want to do good. I don't want to cause harm. So what is it that I need to do? So I was just on that path where I was either in self-help, education, or trade, and sometimes all 3 of those throughout the years. So I just engulf myself with classes online, with college and trades, just knowing that, hey, I gotta do something. I gotta get some skills. I gotta be able to be of some kind of, use when I do. If I get out again, I don't want to be stuck. There's, it's not an option for me to sell drugs. Right. I need to get a job. I gotta be responsible. I gotta do the right thing. And so that's when I just started taking those classes. So I'd say after a couple of years, maybe a year and a half, 2 years, that's when I really just started buckling down and just, doing everything I could.
And when do you think for you that you had become a completed project, someone that was truly prepared to get out, to withstand and own, the crime and the consequences. How long did that take when you were truly, I guess we'll say, rehabilitated?
I would like to say the first time I was eligible, but that's not the case. I mean, I remember reading back on transcripts and seeing my response when they'd ask me a question. I would leave that hearing, drained because the family was there. It was really hard for me to pat myself on the back or accept, any kind of positive, constructive criticism when it came to like, oh, that's great. Well, you have this and you've done this and you've taken these trades and you've done these self-helps. I felt like it was insulting to the family. So I kind of would put myself down in those hearings, and that went against me. And at the same time, I wasn't completely taking responsibility. It wasn't until the very last time, and not just because they found me suitable, but because I finally got it.
Recidivism is entirely too high, especially when we have a tendency to imprison primarily young black males, but also men of color.
Absolutely. African Americans represent roughly 13% of the U.S. population, but almost 35% of the U.S. prison population. There's been quite a lot of scholarly debate over the cause and consequences of these disparate outcomes.
I've had some conversations with inmates that were super receptive and very thrilled to be expanding their mind. An inmate busy, in part, can help keep them out of trouble. If we're going to release these prisoners out into the free world, they're going to need to have at least a bare minimum of skills. And it's hard to get a job nowadays without a GED. But I would say above and beyond, you've got prisoners who already have their high school diploma. We need to try to figure out how to get them college education, at least an associate's degree.
Hey, I'm Haley Benamarch-Deacon. The way I sum up my job most often is social justice tech sales. I try to get folks to hire our currently incarcerated engineers at industry standard wages.
The Prison Chronicles is a limited series from the Break It Down show from executive producer Pete A. Turner. Hey, we release 5 new episodes a week of the Break It Down show, aka BIDS. It would be awesome if you liked, shared, subscribed, reviewed. Those things always help us out. There are quite a few people to thank and give credit to, including co-producer John Leon Guerrero, who hosted, edited, and directed the music for the series. Also, co-producer Tony Alvarado, who took all of the disparate interviews, exploded them into 1,000 pieces, and put them back together as the writer of the Prison Chronicles. The show is associate produced by Dr. Richard Ledet, my field partner in Afghanistan. He helped us work on the research questions and understanding what work is being done academically in the prison systems. He's also a host on several of the episodes and a guest. Music is provided by Eric Stenglin, Hell Nasty, Dylan Sitz, Cushy, Faison. Also, John did some of the music himself too, so he deserves an extra hat tip for that. As always, I want to thank my producer, engineer, editor, Damian Georgiev. And of course, I want to thank all of our guests. There is so much wisdom and power in all of their experience and work, and I cannot say thank you to them enough. Thank you, all of you. If you have comments, suggestions, or just want to get in contact with the show, feel free to email me at pete@breakitdownshow.com or hit me up on social media at Pete A. Turner on all platforms. Thank you again. We'll see you next time.